life stories, true stories that touch the heart and shake the soul. Subscribe now to follow today's unforgettable journey. She walked into the courtroom with nothing but a flash drive in her purse and a storm in her heart. Everyone thought she'd crumble. After all, her ex-husband was powerful, polished, and untouchable until she exposed a secret that no one saw coming. What happens when a woman they tried to silence refuses to disappear? This isn't just a divorce story. It's a story of betrayal, survival, and one woman's quiet, calculated revenge through truth. And the twist? She didn't want to destroy him. She wanted something far more powerful, her identity back. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's powerful journey. You won't want to miss a second. The courtroom was colder than Claire Matthews remembered. Not physically, though the air conditioning had a bite, but emotionally. A silence hung in the room like fog, thick and heavy, made worse by the late spring sunlight slanting through the tall windows of the Seattle courthouse, as if even the sun was reluctant to touch this place. Claire sat at the plaintiff's table, her fingers clenched tight around the edge of her seat. Her knuckles had gone white. She couldn't bring herself to look directly across the room. Not yet. But she felt him. Richard Grant, her ex-husband, sat just feet away, leaning in to whisper smugly to his attorney, Jonathan Blake. His voice, like always, was low and confident, calculated. That same arrogance twisted across his lips, the exact smirk he wore the night he threw her suitcase onto the lawn and said, "You have nothing." Now here they were. In a room where truth was supposed to be sacred, Richard arrived with a performance rehearsed to perfection. He brought binders, neatly tabbed, color-coded, and full of evidence, documents that claimed Claire was financially reckless, emotionally unstable, and unfit to handle anything of value. His attorney played his part flawlessly, addressing Judge Helen Whitmore with dramatic flair, like a man performing in a courtroom drama. The way he emphasized proof of instability made Claire's stomach twist. But she didn't flinch. Her heart pounded in her chest like a war drum, but her face was a fortress, cold, controlled, silent. When the court clerk called her name, it echoed through the room like a shot. Her limbs moved slowly as if she were underwater, but she stood, dignified, poised. As the bailiff guided her to the stand, she thought not of Richard or his carefully planted lies, but of Lauren, her sister, who once whispered, "Maybe it's time to remember who you were before him." As she sat in the witness chair, the judge's voice cut through her thoughts. "Please state your name for the record." Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "Claire Matthews." And with those words, the mask cracked, internally at least. Behind the calm exterior was a storm of memories, emotions, years she'd kept buried beneath fake smiles and echoing silence. There was a time when Claire believed she had married the love of her life. Richard was charming, confident, and magnetic. They met at a university fundraiser. Claire had been a coordinator for the event, managing alumni donations. Richard was a guest speaker, representing one of the finance firms sponsoring the night. He told her she had the spark of a woman destined for more, and she believed him. Back then, he showered her with compliments, weekend getaways, whispered promises about the future. "You won't have to work a day in your life," he once said, holding her hand under a cafe table. "My wife deserves to be taken care of." It felt like love. But later, it would feel like a gilded cage. Their wedding was beautiful, tasteful, and elegant. A garden ceremony beneath blooming cherry blossoms. Claire remembered Lauren squeezing her hand before she walked down the aisle. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Claire had laughed it off. Just nerves, she thought. But it wasn't nerves, it was instinct. Richard began his transformation subtly. He encouraged her to leave her job, told her she was too stressed. "Why waste time when we're building a family?" She agreed, trusting him. After all, he was successful. He knew money, the system, life. The walls of their house grew thick. The silences became sharp. The man who once worshipped her now watched her like a warden. Every decision was questioned. Every idea she had was silly or unrealistic. One night, over a dinner neither of them spoke much through, he looked up and asked, Do you really think you're contributing anything around here? She blinked, her fork frozen midair. He didn't even look at her. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Richard slept peacefully. The house was immaculate. The bills were paid, but her spirit was suffocating. He gaslit her so skillfully she began to believe she was the problem. If she cried, she was too sensitive. If she stood up for herself, she was ungrateful. He controlled the finances, her schedule, even her phone. He called it protecting their marriage. She called it prison. Outsiders saw a power couple, handsome, successful, philanthropic. Behind the doors of their pristine suburban home, Claire was unraveling, but something inside her refused to die. It started with morning walks, earlier and earlier each week, when the neighborhood was still asleep. She told Richard she was exercising, but really she just needed to breathe, to think, to remember who she used to be. One morning, trembling and half awake, she called her sister. "I don't know who I am anymore." Lauren didn't hesitate. "Then maybe it's time to find out." And that was the beginning. Claire found a therapist who worked pro bono with women in emotionally abusive relationships. She didn't tell Claire what to do. She just listened, validated, named the manipulation, named the control, gave her back a language for the wounds she couldn't explain. And slowly, Claire began to fight back. In secret, she opened a hidden bank account. She took freelance writing gigs under a friend's name. She started collecting documents, receipts, emails, recordings, all while pretending to play the role of the loving wife. Then came the day she told Richard she wanted a divorce. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a wounded one. It was cold, mocking. "You think you're getting out of this with anything?" he sneered. "You won't even have your name when I'm done." And that's when she saw it, the plan, the trap he had already set. But Richard didn't know something had changed. Claire was no longer afraid. She had been gathering evidence for months. She had allies now. Vanessa Reed, a young but razor-sharp attorney, took on her case pro bono. "He chose the wrong woman to underestimate," Vanessa had said. And now in the courtroom, facing the man who had once controlled every aspect of her life, Claire sat silently, weaponized by the truth, and ready. Because Richard had secrets too, and Claire was about to reveal something he never expected. What do you think Richard's biggest mistake was? Underestimating Claire, or believing no one would ever believe her? Have you ever witnessed someone reclaim their voice after being silenced? How did it change them? Part 2 is coming next. Claire takes her first shot in court, and Richard's perfect plan begins to unravel. Claire sat upright in the witness chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Outwardly calm, inwardly coiled tight like a spring. Her eyes didn't flinch when Richard's lawyer approached with his signature swagger, the kind that said, "I've already won." Jonathan Blake wore a smile just shy of condescension as he began. "Miss Matthews, can you confirm that you willingly left the marital home on April 3rd of last year?" "Yes," Claire answered evenly. "I left, but not willingly." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Jonathan blinked. "I was locked out," she added, her voice gaining steel. "The locks were changed while I was at a meeting with my attorney. My key didn't work. A note taped to the door said I was trespassing." Jonathan shifted. "Do you have proof of this note?" Claire turned to Vanessa, who calmly slid an enlarged, high-resolution photograph across the table, taken the moment Claire had arrived home that night. The note was taped to the door in bold, unmistakable font. "Entry is unauthorized. Property transferred." Claire met Rich Eyes for the first time. He didn't blink, but the tension in his jaw was visible. Jonathan recovered quickly. "Let's return to your financial conduct. Do you recall withdrawing over $12,000 from the joint account just weeks before you left willingly?" Claire didn't hesitate. "I recall checking our account and finding it completely empty." Jonathan's face twitched. "I didn't withdraw a cent," she said clearly. "In fact, I brought a copy of the bank's transaction logs. The account was drained 2 weeks prior to that date. By Mr. Grant." Vanessa handed the judge the printed documents, stamped, time-stamped, verified. Claire watched as Judge Whitmore's eyes narrowed slightly as she scanned the paperwork. Richard shifted in his chair. And just for the court's record, Vanessa added calmly, we have submitted a forensic report confirming Miss Matthews' online banking access was revoked 2 days before the transfers occurred. The silence was deafening. Jonathan attempted to pivot. Miss Matthews, were you aware that your husband's financial advisor had warned you months before about the risks of separating assets too quickly? Claire tilted her head slightly. Which advisor are you referring to? Marcus Ellison. Jonathan's eyes flicked. Yes. Well, Claire said smoothly, then you might want to inform Mr. Ellison that I've subpoenaed him. Another murmur broke across the room. Jonathan's composure slipped, just slightly, and for the first time, Richard's eyes darted toward Vanessa. A flicker of unease. Vanessa stood. Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to introduce into evidence a flash drive containing communications between Mr. Grant and Mr. Grant Ellison, messages recovered from a shared cloud backup. These include discussions about asset concealment and document manipulation, including one file titled, she paused, her voice ice cold, she'll never see it coming, .pdf. The gallery gasped. Even Judge Whitmore's face, carved in courtroom stone, cracked just enough to raise an eyebrow. Jonathan shot up. Objection! We were not made aware. The content was only recovered this past week, Vanessa replied. And it speaks directly to the integrity of the defendant's financial disclosures. Judge Whitmore nodded. Admitted. I'll review the files myself after today's session. Richard's face drained of color. Claire didn't smile. She didn't move. But inside, she felt something stir for the first time in months. Momentum. The hearing wrapped for the day shortly after. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. Word was spreading. Not with names, not yet. But the headlines were starting to circle. Divorce trial reveals alleged asset concealment, forged documents suspected, a financial strategist under scrutiny. Richard walked briskly to his black sedan, eyes on the ground. Sabrina, the younger woman who had walked in proudly on his arm just days ago, wasn't with him this time. Vanessa and Claire stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps. That was a good hit, Vanessa said. Claire nodded, her voice low. It's not over, not even close. No, Vanessa agreed, her eyes sharp, but for the first time, he flinched. Claire looked back at the courthouse doors, then up at the gray Seattle sky. Rain had started to fall, soft, cold, steady, but it wasn't the kind that made her shrink. It was the kind that washed things clean, no matter the cost. What would you do if someone tried to erase your story with lies? Stay silent or fight back, no matter the cost. Coming in part 3, a ghost from Richard's past resurfaces with a secret that could unravel everything. And Claire learns that justice isn't always clean, but it is coming. It wasn't the headlines that broke Richard Grant. It was the whisper of truth slipping into the cracks he never thought existed. A week after the courtroom bombshell, Marcus Ellison, Richard's longtime accountant, broke his silence. It wasn't voluntary. He'd been subpoenaed, and when he stepped into the sterile gray room for his sealed deposition, his hands were shaking. Vanessa and a forensic analyst sat across from him, files stacked neatly on the table. A recorder blinked silently in the corner. Marcus glanced toward the door as if hoping someone might rescue him. No one did. I didn't know it would go this far, he said finally, voice cracking. He said it was just protection, that he wanted to safeguard his assets from an emotional meltdown. He never said she was building a case. Vanessa was calm, relentless. Did you help him forge any documents? Marcus hesitated. Yes, he whispered. It was over. By the time the court reconvened, Richard was no longer the confident man Claire once feared. He was pale, jittery, constantly whispering to Jonathan Blake with a look of panic behind his eyes. The charm had faded. The mask had cracked. And then came the final blow. Vanessa submitted a second flash drive, one delivered late one night by Erica Nolan, Richard's former assistant. Erica had reached out anonymously, said she couldn't live with what she knew. She provided copies of Richard's email exchanges with another attorney, dated months before Claire ever filed for divorce, strategizing how to hide assets in offshore companies under dummy names. One file was titled simply, Division Strategy, Control.doc. Its content? A spreadsheet outlining what Claire would emotionally settle for versus actual legal value of assets. One cell read, "Let her cry, then offer 15%. She'll take it." Claire stared at that line on the screen in the courtroom and felt something strange. She didn't feel broken. She felt free. When the judge called the court to order for final remarks, Claire was asked if she had anything to say. She rose slowly. The courtroom hushed. "I stayed quiet for a long time," she began, her voice calm, clear. "I believed silence was love. I believed that if I just worked harder, tried more, endured longer, things would change. But the more I stayed silent, the more I disappeared." She glanced at Richard, but only for a moment. "You tried to erase me, not just financially, but completely. You made me believe I was crazy, worthless. But I wasn't. I'm not." She turned to Judge Whitmore. This wasn't just about money. This was about truth, about a woman refusing to be rewritten by someone else's version of her. There was no applause, no dramatic music, just silence, and the sound of something heavy finally being set down. The judge leaned forward. "In reviewing the full breadth of this case," she said, her voice unwavering, "this court finds that a deliberate and malicious attempt was made to conceal marital assets, mislead the court, and manipulate legal proceedings." She paused. "In addition to awarding Miss Matthews full access to the marital estate, this court is referring the defendant's actions to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation." Claire didn't breathe for a second, and then she exhaled. It was over. Not the way she'd expected, not with vengeance or rage, but with truth. That night, Claire didn't return to the Sunrise Motel. She packed her things quietly and walked out into the cool night air, stars hidden behind soft gray clouds. The next morning, she moved into a small apartment in Greenview, a quiet neighborhood just outside Seattle. It wasn't fancy, but every item inside it had been chosen by her. The curtains, the chipped coffee mug, even the secondhand bookshelf she assembled herself. It was hers. Freedom didn't come like fireworks. It came softly in the sound of her own music, in drinking coffee barefoot in the morning, in waking up without dread. Claire started volunteering at a local legal aid center, helping other women navigate financial abuse. She didn't tell them her full story. She didn't need to. She just looked them in the eye and said, "You have a voice. They can't take that from you." One rainy afternoon, as she left the center, she saw a familiar figure across the street. Richard, alone. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes tired. He wasn't the man from the courtroom or the one from the garden wedding. He looked small. Their eyes met. Just for a second, he didn't speak, and neither did she. She turned and walked away. Not out of anger, out of peace, because she had reclaimed what he tried to bury, herself. Weeks later, she stood on a stage at a domestic financial abuse seminar, speaking to a room full of nervous, quiet women, women who had brought their pain in silence. She looked out at them, her heart full. "They tried to make me believe that survival was strength, that endurance was love, but now I know, real strength is truth. Real love never asks you to disappear." The room was silent. Then slowly, hands rose in applause, not loud, but heavy with meaning. And Claire, she smiled, not because she won, but because she never gave up. How did this story make you feel? What part resonated with you the most? If you were moved by Claire's journey, comment 100 down below so we know you're with her all the way. Where are you watching from? Let us know your country in the comments. We love hearing from you around the world. And if you believe this story can help or inspire someone else, please share this video. You never know who might need to hear that they too can rise after the storm.